thank you all very much for coming out tonight. Can you hear me back there? Okay, great. That is the nicest introduction I've received, and I must say that generally I am known as the social skills lady. So here we are tonight talking a little bit about social skills. I'm going to be talking to you about the work we've done here, both clinically and with regard to research. And I would just be curious, before I start my talk, if you could tell me how many of you are parents of individuals with autism spectrum disorders? Okay. How many are teachers or speech and language paths working with the kids? Great. How many of you are researchers? Okay. And how many of you are individuals with autism spectrum disorders, if you want to identify? Okay, great. Well, thank you. That'll just help me tailor my remarks. So what I'd like to do tonight is to talk to you first, kind of wearing my hat as a person who holds a Ph.D. in adult development and adolescent development, talk to you some about what is considered typical development. And then I'd like to tell you some about what we know about adolescent development in individuals with autism spectrum disorders. And here I'm going to talk to you about some of the research that I've done and some of my colleagues have done on this issue. Then I'm going to talk to you a little bit about models of social skills training and try to highlight for you how they're informed by development. And I'm going to talk to you about the model that we've used here at the Mind Institute. And I'm going to try to get to be a little bit more practically oriented at this point. I'm going to try to take some of the information I've given you about development and talk to you about how we've tried to meld this into a developmentally appropriate curriculum to teach the kinds of skills and capabilities that are necessary when one reaches adolescence and even on into early adulthood. And then I'm going to conclude with a discussion of some of the real clinically relevant issues that we encounter when working in our groups, primarily, and also just with individuals with autism spectrum disorders in adolescence and adulthood. Throughout the presentation, this is kind of a newly revised and toned presentation because it contains a lot of clips of individuals that are either current participants or past participants in our groups talking about their experiences and trying to illustrate some of the points. So first, let's talk a little bit about what we know about typical adolescent development from both a behavioral perspective and then a neuroscience perspective. Okay, now how many people in here took Psych 1? Everyone probably knows about Freud and all that Freud had to say and have probably largely rolled their eyes. Freud and then later his daughter Anna are well known for their theories of psychosocial development. There are some real very important points of these theories and a lot of points that have been roundly debunked. But at this point, I think it's interesting to note that Freud believed that adolescence was basically the genital stage of development, and that adolescence was always a time of Sturm and Drang, which, if someone can correct my German, I think it just kind of means a lot of conflict. And it was a time when individuals experienced a lot of pressure to emancipate from their families, so to leave the nest, to attain their sexual role maturity and their sexual identities, and to achieve economic independence if you were a male. I don't know what Anna had to say about that. She was one of the key proponents of this whole Sturm and Drang theory. But the period, according to this theory, was one that was filled with conflicts with parents and a lot of issues over forming intimate relationships. So I want you to keep this in mind because there is some relevance to all of this. Some other theorists who are perhaps, as my graduate student advisor was fond of saying, had more congenial theories, believed that adolescence was really a time where identity development was of paramount importance. So theorists like Erikson felt that the real goal and job that people had to achieve between the time they were teenagers and 20 was to develop a real integrated sense of their selves and to be comfortable with their sense of themselves. Another theorist, James Marcia, believed, and Erikson also believed, that this period was characterized by this sort of identity crisis, needing to figure out who you were. And he believed that it was your level of personal commitment to this struggle and this challenge that defined how successful you were going to be as an adult. You needed to be committed to this crisis and the search process. So with crisis, you could achieve an adult identity, or if you didn't really do so well, you would achieve a moratorium, so you're sort of stuck. If you didn't have a crisis, you either went into sort of more foreclosed and less well-developed identity, or identity diffusion, which meant that you didn't really have a very strong or firm identity. Other important things that are known to be tasks of adolescent development revolve around cognitive development. And probably a lot of you have heard about Piaget, who was very influential in this whole area. Well, Piaget really believed that the period of adolescence was a time he called formal operations, and it was a time when individuals developed the capacity to think abstractly. So to think about things that weren't really there, but to reason about important problems and important societal issues, and that you would develop at that point in time the potential to engage in moral reasoning. So the theorist Kohlberg came around and really took that home and talked a lot about how most individuals actually never attained the highest stage of moral reasoning, which really involved taking larger perspective versus one's own perspective into account when making moral decisions, but that most people were much more conventional. They were very law and order, they wanted to be good, they didn't want to get in trouble. But really, the highest form of cognitive development related to moral reasoning was if you could have a principled conscience. So really take all of society's view when you were making moral decisions. Another theorist that was really important kind of later on is a woman named Carol Gilligan, who wrote a book called In a Different Voice. She had a real perspective on moral development that differed from the male perspective. Her perspective was that, men are so about becoming independent and achieving identities without thinking about anybody else. Your identity is something independent. Carol Gilligan really added that women had a different kind of a perspective, and a different perspective that informed their moral reasoning that wasn't necessarily a lower form of moral reasoning, but was one that incorporated individuals other than themselves. So that the self was not something to be individual, but really to be something that's viewed in relation to other people. And interestingly, this really kind of overlaps with a lot of cross-cultural psychology that suggests that the self is defined largely in relation to a culture, a greater culture that one lives. So my first little clip for you tonight is a girl from one of our groups. She's been in our group for 2 years now, and she really wanted to be taped. And I'm going to have her discuss for you a relationship she has with one of her friends. And I think one of the things my colleague Narit Bauminger in Israel, and we'll look at some of her work later, was very instrumental in showing us is that individuals with autism, I think the old theory was that people with autism and autism spectrum disorders really didn't want relationships, really couldn't have relationships. Well, I think you can see from Melanie here that individuals with autism really can speak very fondly about friends and very much in relation. Oops, hold on a second.
So we're going to talk about you and your friend Noemi, and so I'm just going to ask you some really easy questions. So first question, what does being a friend mean to you?
I think being a friend means to be honest and trustworthy to them and always be there for them.
That's great. Tell me about your friend Noemi.
Well, Noemi, she and I have been friends ever since we met, and she's sweet and kind and honest, and even though she's busy, I always know she's always been busy. Yeah, that's pretty much that.
So somebody who's very much concerned with having relationships, really knows when somebody's good and kind and is very concerned about it all. Hasn't had a lot of relationships, I'd say, but has found somebody in the group and is really very attached to this person. And we'll hear from her friend later. So What we know about the tasks that are important in adolescence, and actually I want to start here just with school-age children to give you a little sense of the transition. In school age, so those are children that are kind of younger than teenagers, there's a growing independence. Their friends tend to be of the same gender. And they tend to have a group of sort of 5 changing friends and a constant enemy. They can nurture younger children and follow older ones. And they're beginning to see other people's points of view, but they still really are kind of egocentric. And they have strong attachments to authority figures, and they really rely very heavily on their parents for what they think is right, socially. Moving on into adolescence, you see a real growth, generally in typical development, of peers versus families. So kids go out, and it's very important on the playground and the lunchroom to find your group. And we'll talk a little bit about how we're addressing that in groups later. Greater relationship intimacies become possible, and we're going to talk a little bit more about the cognitive neuroscience view of that. But Piaget and Kohlberg talked about how being able to see other people's perspectives became more developed. There's puberty and the need to manage one's sexuality. There's an increased, if you read the newspapers, you'll know generally risky behavior of all sorts. If anyone has been around a lot of adolescents, they know that quite a lot of them believe that they are the center of the universe and that no one has ever experienced any of the things that they're experiencing before in the history of man. So they're still relatively egocentric in thinking and reasoning, but they are experiencing growing independence. So this is one of our group members who's reflecting on what it's like to be an adolescent with Asperger's.
As a teenager with Asperger's syndrome, what do you feel are your challenges?
Definitely making friends and keeping friends and basically just being social around other people. It'd be hard enough being a normal teenager, socially.
It's a lot of challenges.
Yeah.
So this is your 2nd year in social skills here with us. Do you believe it's been helpful to you?
Definitely.
Why do you think it's been helpful? What are some of your favorite parts?
Well, it's helped me make some friends and figure out how to keep people's friends.
And you can see, well, I'll tell you, I don't know what you can see from that, but she's a girl who's developed several, not incredibly intimate, but several relationships in our group. She has people to talk to. She has people to play games with and draw with. But she entered a new high school last year, and the world of high school, she's becoming more and more aware of it, more and more aware of where she fits, where she doesn't fit. But it still really is quite a challenge. So the whole notion of adolescent development has captured a lot of attention lately from cognitive neuroscience. There's been a whole, ever since the advent of functional imaging and other non-invasive forms of imaging, there's been a real growth in what we know about the brain and a real thirst and quest to figure out what's going on in adolescence that's different in other periods. So people have gone back to some of the theorists that I've talked about and have tried to look at that whole notion of why do we have increased self-focus during adolescence? Why do we have that enhanced risk-taking? And have really come up with some models that I'm going to talk about now. This is the work of a fellow named Steinberg at Yale, who's a developmental psychologist who studied this period intensively. And you can see that there's really, according to him, and a thought that's been picked up on by a lot of researchers, a mismatch here. You have that solid line, which is intellectual ability, which is really, really escalating and very high through that whole teen, adolescent, and even early adulthood period. But then you have psychosocial maturity, so risk perception, sensation seeking, impulsivity, resistance to peer pressure, and you see that that is really lagging behind. So folks are thinking that this is a period where there's just, an imbalance, and that's leading to some of the challenges and the upheavals that's present in some folks. Looked at from a slightly different perspective, we're now really fortunate to have some longitudinal studies of brain development coming from the NIH. And just to give a little commercial, the person who's largely responsible for this work, a man named Jay Geed, will be here at Mind, I believe, next week for our Distinguished Lecture Series. But this group has documented that there really are structural changes that go on in the brain during the period of adolescence. There's thinning of gray matter, and then there's myelination, which is white matter, the increased white matter, which is thought to be responsible for improved abilities, maybe to coordinate between brain regions. You can see over on the right that there's been a lot of work now actually looking at ADHD, individuals with ADHD, to take a look if their proportions of gray matter and white matter normalize over time. And across the cortex, you do see some catching up by the 20s. And in the prefrontal cortex, there's a little bit more lag behind, but you do see that the individuals with ADHD eventually do catch up. Another way people have looked at that, and this is the work of some of the folks at NIH, Monique Ernst, has looked at the balance between different regions of the brain. And again, she's looked at adults are on the left and adolescents are on the right. And you can see this sort of little notion of a balance scale. You have the medial and ventral prefrontal cortex, so those are those prefrontal cortical regions I was talking about. And then you have some of the more limbic regions of the brain, which are responsible for reward processing, sensation seeking, actually fear as well. And they've hypothesized that perhaps the medial prefrontal cortex in adulthood is in balance with those two, the ventral striatum, which they're saying the reward seeking is more associated with approach, whereas the amygdala would kind of make you be scared, so it would kind of keep you in check. And that in adolescence, there may be an inherent imbalance in the way the PFC is able to influence these regions. So that's kind of an interesting notion, and we were fortunate to have a chance to interview one of our social skills participants, and it occurred to me, this boy is now just starting his first year at Sierra College, and he was in our group for about 2 years, and one of the most wonderful things that happened for him was that he became able to get his emotions more in check. So this sort of notion that perhaps if you could hasten the cognitive control and the prefrontal cortical strength over some of the more limbic regions, you could achieve some real positive benefits in individuals. Now, your mom was telling me, I think it was this summer that you were working there. There was some person there who was kind of swearing a lot, but you were very good and calm about not, getting upset. Is that true?
Yeah. Well, some of them aren't exactly came in the are sort of breaking the language barriers.
I didn't really set it up well. He's a person who is quite rigid in his response to swearing. So usually he would walk into a group frowning if he had a bad day, and if somebody swore, he'd be very, very angry. When he went off to Pride Industries, where he had a great job experience this last year, his coworker was a swearer. So that's what he's talking about. Okay. Okay, but that hasn't really bothered you or affected your ability to work?
No, it hasn't.
Uh-huh. And that's really interesting to me because I remember when you first came to the Mind Institute a couple of years ago, one of your challenges was I could always tell when you were not having a good day, you would start going like this. You would get all upset. But then as I saw you grow up a lot, that didn't really happen anymore. You didn't get mad at people easy or anything. And I was sort of curious, how did you achieve that for yourself? How did you make that happen for yourself? Because I think other people would want to learn about that.
Well, being autistic, I have been getting a little temperamental, but now I'm asking questions about why that is. Because I want to at least infer that I'm not making a false interpretation.
Oh, okay. So you've kind of gotten broader about, you used to just interpret like a little of the data the way you saw it, but now you stop and you ask more questions about why someone's doing something or why something's happening?
Yes.
Oh, that's really good information. So did that help you at all that summer you were at Pride with the person who was swearing?
Yes, it did.
How did it help?
Well, I was able to keep my temper in check.
Mm-hmm. Was there anything you would tell yourself so that you wouldn't get upset by that person?
yeah, I'd probably be telling myself that he's probably having a rough day also, or that he's not exactly understanding some of the rules about some of the rules there.
So just to sum up our little tour through developmental psychology from a behavioral and neuroscience perspective, adolescence is a time of identity development, increased sense of self apart from the family, a lot of pressure to define oneself as a sexual individual, as a worker, and a time of rapid but imbalanced cognitive development. So you have the growth of reasoning abilities. You could see in the boy we just saw, he started to be able to step back. He started to be able to consider things from multiple perspectives, to talk to himself a little bit better. But there's a lot of strong drives. You know, some of the sexual drives and the peer pressure drives are very strong. So the prefrontal cortex may not be able to exert enough control, or things may be imbalanced a little bit. And one thing we didn't talk about, but is pretty evident, is that there's a lot of hormones circulating, and also just an important fact is there's a lot of increase of certain mental disorders that occur during that whole adolescent period. So depression, psychotic disorders are very common, across the general population. There's an increased incidence of these. So I think we all repressed what a crazy time that was. But adolescence is really a time of a lot of challenges. And I want you to keep that in mind when we talk a little bit about the way we work with children. Adolescents, I mean. So what do we know about adolescent development in individuals with autism spectrum disorders? Well, we don't have a whole lot of good developmental research. We've been trying to do some, so pardon me if this is a little bit of a patch quilt. And I'm going to tell you about some of the research we've done here, and I've done with some other colleagues. So let's talk about that, something called cognitive control or executive functions that are related to that brain region, the prefrontal cortex. In typical development, we know that executive functions continue to improve through adolescence. We've talked a little bit about that. But in autism spectrum disorders, we really don't know yet, and the evidence is kind of mixed. We've actually, in our studies, in my lab, found, in some cases, we found one study it looked like it didn't improve, in another study it looked like it did improve. So there's really a lot of open questions. And the question that I put to you here, is it deviance, which means that it would never fully improve? Is it delay, which would mean that it's just a little bit delayed? Or is it a combination of the both? And that, to me, is a really interesting research question that I think has very important implications for the lifespan of individuals with autism spectrum disorders. So I've been studying, bit by bit, this whole question using a task we call the POP task, Preparing to Overcome Prepotency. And in this task, you see a cue. You either see a green square or a red square. Then you get a little time to wait, and then you see an arrow. If you see an arrow, if you've just had a green cue and you see an arrow that points to the right, you're supposed to push the button on the right. If you see a red cue and you see an arrow that points to the right, you're supposed to overcome that prepotent urge to push to the same side that the arrow's on and push to the opposite side. So when you get a red cue, it's going to be harder for you. So it's about controlling your impulses, basically. Does that make sense? I see some people frowning. So you see green square, green square, green square, and then you get a delay, and then you see an arrow pointing to the right, and you need to push the button on the right. And you do that a couple of times, because there's actually more of those green squares. Then you see a red square, and you see an arrow pointing to the right, and you need to reverse, and you need to push to the left side. So that makes it a little bit harder. And we found now in 2 studies that individuals with autism are worse at that kind of impulse inhibition. They do worse on those red cues, and they're slower on those red cues. We've used this task in a functional magnetic resonance imaging scanner paradigm, and what we found was that 2 regions of the brain, the anterior prefrontal cortex, so a region in that prefrontal cortex that I was speaking about, and actually a region in the parietal cortex, which is also very largely written about as being involved in attention, showed less activation in individuals with autism when they were looking at those red cues. So it looks like something different may be going on in their brains when they're trying to overcome that prepotent response tendency. And an interesting fact was we then looked at the coactivation, or what was going on in the front of the brain at the same time something was going on in the back of the brain. And when there was better coordination between those regions, ADHD symptoms were lower. So you probably, a lot of you probably know that a lot of individuals with autism also have these ADHD-like symptoms or attention symptoms. And so what we found out was that front to back, that frontal parietal connectivity was related to symptoms. So if you had better connectivity, you had less symptoms. We've also been doing some work actually in young adults on more of these prefrontal cortical functions. One is a learning paradigm called a transitive inference paradigm, where you get trained on a bunch of stimulus pairs, and you can see those Japanese characters up there on the left, and you get trained that one goes with the other, and they're trained in a kind of a hierarchy. So the top position, that we call that the A, this is the first one is the A-B pair. So that A-B pair, you always know that the character on the left is what you're supposed to press to versus the character on the right. And all kinds of animal species have been shown that if you get trained on a hierarchy, you can make inferences about the hierarchy. So you may have never seen, this is very frustrating. Just go up here and show you. You may have never seen that second rectangle down there, the squiggle on the left. You've never seen that paired with that one that looks a little bit like here on the right on the third pair. But if you're presented with those independently after you've been trained, most species, and actually we found people with autism can make that inference. They just automatically know the hierarchy. We did find one interesting thing, which is that individuals with autism, and this has not been documented across any other patient group or species that I know of, the other pair where the one is always correct on the top pair and the one on the right at the bottom is always never reinforced, we found that there were differences in that pair, that individuals with autism didn't recognize that kind of abstraction. So one piece of evidence that we're really interested about a kind of abstraction and abstract reason that people with autism may have trouble with, and this is young adults. We also have done another paradigm where we've looked at card sorting. And we wanted to see if individuals with autism could sort according to categories that they had to come up with themselves. And we found in adults, another group found that adults were able to catch up and were able to sort cards and identify sorts that other people have done, that they had deficits only in the ability to generate a sort. So if you're given a stack of 6 cards, and some of the cards are red and some of them are blue, and you're asked by the examiner to sort them, and to come up with independent ways to sort them. And the cards have all different kinds of features. They're either red and blue, they have capital letters or small letters, they have words on them that say train, some of them are transportation, and some of them are animals. Individuals with autism were less able to come up with independently generated sorts based on those categories. But others have shown that when they get to be about 20, they're able to identify the sorts that you do. We found that they were impaired across both. And that's interesting because in a minute I'm going to show you that we actually found a relationship with behavior and that. But back to the notion of the functional connectivity I was talking to you about, and we've been asking the same kind of question that the individuals with ADHD asked. Do individuals with autism maybe catch up over time? So what you see here is our young typical subjects in that pop test that I showed you before, and you can see that the regions in the prefrontal cortex of their brains, kind of to the back, light up when they're 12 to 15. But look at individuals with autism. They don't show the same kind of connectivity. You can only see some isolated connectivity in the prefrontal cortex when they're asked to do that task. If you look at older typically developing individuals, you can see how from the prefrontal cortex, they're already showing connectivity with that parietal cortex that's really strong. And individuals with autism are just sort of looking like the young typicals at that point. So maybe there's a catch-up, more evidence of something we're investigating. Another thing that we know about adolescent development in individuals with autism is about friendship. So as we talked a little bit before, it's very important that all adolescents have friendship. Individuals with autism, as you saw, I've never met one that didn't want to have some friendships. Maybe they failed a lot, but once they get in a room with a lot of other kids, they tend to be kind of happy and tend to actually like to be with the other kids. And many aspects of friendship are very similar to those of typically developing adolescents, but some of them are different. And we wrote 2 papers with a colleague of ours from Israel that documented that many aspects of friendship were similar, but some of the aspects of friendship were different. The depth, the quality of the intimacy was different across both these studies. And it didn't really matter whether the friendship dyad consisted of individuals with another disability or whether they were typically developing individuals. And as an illustration of that, you remember you saw the Melanie up front. Now this is the friend that she was talking about her.
What do you do when you hang out outside of the mind?
Go to movies, go to each other's. Well, she never been to my house, but I've been to her house. Go to a mall. Normal girl stuff.
Fun girl stuff. How did you know that you guys were friends?
Well, when she kept coming over to me and talking to me and kept hanging out and bonding over magazines and stuff.
What kind of magazines and stuff?
Celebrity magazines, girl magazines.
Very cool. Good stuff to look at then.
Yeah.
So you already answered, but is there anything else you guys like to do together?
Well, yeah, we like to gossip about the magazines, like to do the quizzes. We just like to talk and stuff.
Is she someone that you could call if you felt you needed to talk to someone about good things, bad things, and kind of things?
Well, it depends because sometimes she could talk a little more about something that I don't really want to talk about, like if she was talking about a movie, but that I wanted to really talk to her, she wouldn't really say, "Oh, are you okay?" She'd be keep talking about it.
So I'm sure we've all experienced that in our lives and in the lives of our children. But you can see there's a lot of really very intact elements of that friendship and some elements that they're working on. And some ways in which the friendship may be a little bit less intimate than a comparable pair of typically developing girls. So we're excited. Actually, last week we had accepted finally for publication a paper that I worked on with these same 2 collaborators where we discussed the friendship. And what we wanted to do was to see if any of those kinds of abstract reasoning variables, those things that are probably associated with the prefrontal cortex, are related to actual friendship-like behaviors. And in these studies, we had pairs of kids with autism and their friends come into the lab, and we engaged them in 2 semi-structured scenarios. One was a scenario where they had to make a joint picture, and another one was a scenario where they had to play a marble maze game together. And we took a look at, was there a relationship between their cognitive abilities and their indices of how strong their friendships were. And indeed, we found that friends reported that their friendship quality was higher if the individual with autism had better abstract reasoning abilities. And that was pretty striking because we had a lot of observers observing the dyads, and there really weren't nearly as many, there weren't any relationships actually with that. But the friends could tell that the friendship was better if the individual with autism had higher abstract reasoning abilities. And then just before we go on to talk about what we do here, I just want to call your attention back to social development and why it matters. Because it's kind of easy to forget that it has a lot of other benefits, other than just being something you'd like to see your child or your students have. But social development is really critical because it influences mental health outcomes through the lifespan. There's been countless studies showing that individuals with friends are just happier. So, a lot of kids with autism spectrum disorders will say, "Why do I need friends? I don't need friends. I don't care." But really, there are a lot of reasons why it's good to have friendships of any quality, of any level of depth and intimacy. It's also pivotal to other forms of development. So learning how to be in a relationship with somebody else has a lot of subsequent benefits on your cognitive development, on your ability to engage in role-related behaviors. And of course, it is really critical for the ability to attain independence, in terms of living, vocational stuff, and marriage and parenthood, and even, self-determination. So don't let a student or don't let your child tell you that they don't care and it's not important, because it really is. So what we began doing here back about 10 years ago is trying to help older, higher functioning children and adolescents. There were a lot of interventions that were very helpful, empirically supported, even for younger, lower functioning children, to teach them language, all forms of ABA, and all its various incarnations. But when you got to the teenage population, which are now really recognized to be over half of the kids that are being diagnosed with autism spectrum disorders, there was not a lot that was known about what you could do about them. One of the things in the literature, though, was social skills groups. So as part of my postdoctoral project, we started some here. We really wanted to help the kids increase their social motivation. We really wanted to help them improve their self-esteem, decrease their sense of isolation, which could lead to that depression that I spoke about before, and to teach very important skills that were going to be necessary for them in life, so they could live independently and have the highest and most fulfilling lives possible. There are a lot of existing methods of teaching social skills to verbal children out there in the literature. So you may be familiar with some of these. Perhaps your children have participated in these, or your students. But there's not a lot of good research about any of these. I will say that the Bauminger school-based approach down at the bottom does have several papers written about it. Our PCIT study, parent-child interaction therapy, we've got a study about in the literature, and social adjustment enhancement, which is what I'm talking to you about tonight. There are some papers in the literature, but I can very honestly say I think we have a very, very long way to go in this literature to know what is really helpful and effective and why. But when we wrote our paper back in 2004, we really targeted 3 areas that we thought were going to be very useful and helpful. One, to remediate emotion regulation, recognition, and awareness deficits. One, to talk about perspective taking and theory of mind. And another, to work on those organizational team skills, maybe those executive functions. And I think over time we've really evolved, and our goals are more to develop scaffold the development of those abstract reasoning abilities, to help with that cognitive control, things that David, the student who talked about anger management, talked about, and to do these things while also teaching the things that we talked about in our original study. In terms of our approach, we use a lot of, it's pretty eclectic. We try to use some cognitive behavior therapy to help people reframe their thoughts and feelings. We use a psychodynamic approach in that, which has kind of been thought to not be a great approach to use with this population, but we find that a lot of the strategies that are used to help develop self-talk, metacognition, knowing to think about yourself, which is what you saw the boy doing when he said, I take a step back, I think about the other person. We try to use those. We use a lot of behavioral approaches because kids in our groups definitely do have behavior problems, so we give a lot of reinforcement. We try to always use positive behavioral support, so reinforce what's good and ignore what's bad. We believe that the group approach is an extremely effective approach for dealing with these kids, and maybe one of the reasons that ABA doesn't really work so well when you get to be this age, because it's also one-on-one based. It's really hard to tell on a one-on-one based situation what kind of social problems a child is actually having. And so in a group, over 20 or 30 weeks, we see really loud and clear what's going on. There's a honeymoon sometimes for a couple weeks, but very soon we see the angry edge that comes out in some people, the fact that they go from 0 to 60 if they lose while playing a game during game time. And then we can really, in the moment, with peers, work on that particular problem. We also take a family systems approach, so we're not just out there alone, working with a child. We're only with a child an hour and a half a week, which is just not a lot. So we know we have to teach parents, and we also here have been very fortunate. The Mind has always funded, for the last 7 or 8 years, a sibling support group. So the siblings have their own groups, to try to help that family system. And I guess, to tell you now why that's so important and why this integrated approach is so important, I'm going to tell you about an example of something that just happened yesterday in group. We've had a girl who's been in our group for 2 years. She's a girl who has a lot of behavioral challenges, and she's about 17, approaching the time when she's going to need to transition. Over the last she's made a lot of progress in group, but over the last couple of weeks, she's had a lot of outbursts and has needed to be taken out a lot. And her mother, who'd become such an effective advocate, was really seeming just not to have a sense of what to do. Behaviorally, we wanted to find out what was going on. We were walking our tightrope in our approaches, so behaviorally, we would work with her dynamically and try to figure out, what's really going on for you. And finally, after taking her and talking to her for a long time, she cried, saying she'd heard that her service worker at the regional center was going to take away her services, and she cried. She said, "So I'm trying to be really not well behaved in groups so I don't have my services taken away." And well, we weren't sure we believed this. There's slight flair for the dramatic here, but it seemed kind of real because it was really associated with tears. But we also realized that by letting her go out every time to talk to somebody, we were really encouraging escape behavior. So we met as a team and we talked about this, and we've been really lucky to have a member of ALTA working with us in our group. And all of us got together and noodled and thought it through. And we were able to talk to Mom. Mom just kind of let loose that she was very concerned about conservator issues, that there'd been some problems with their transition coordinator. So kind of all working together using all these approaches, I think we were able to actually really help the family finally after a period of frustration of none of us knowing quite what was going on. But I think a lot of it's dealing with transition. And we had to really kind of start to address all the pieces of the puzzle in order to really help the problem. When you're doing this kind of work, who should be included? We've actually moved to a model where we use more children. We use kids with good verbal abilities, kids that don't have serious behavioral issues, although I can tell you that we certainly do make mistakes and do end up with kids that we probably think later on aren't so group ready. And then it becomes really a challenge to try to figure out what the best approach to that situation is. We're moving towards a model where we're including typically developing peers this year. In 2 of our groups, we actually have 1 typically developing peer. And we're trying to work on the technology of how many peers is best, how do you best train those typically developing peers, because we're finding that they really are fantastic role models, and they're much more potent social reinforcers than we are. Than myself and some of my leader colleagues who are mother psychologist types. We do try to get younger, cooler graduate students to participate as well, and we always try to get a male graduate student since so many of our participants are boys. We haven't had typically developing peers, but honestly, because we've been doing this not for research lately, but more for revenue purposes, we take people with social cognitive deficits. So kids with depression, nonverbal learning disorder, we always end up with 1 kid every year who's got ADHD, and it always amazes me that we had 1 kid, I'll call him Jack, and he was in a group with another kid, Mark, and Jack clearly had ADHD and was a wonderful social coach. When anyone with autism did something autism-y, he would call him on it. But he was generally bouncing off the walls. And he left the group. The next year, a new kid came in, and I'm going, oh my goodness, another kid with ADHD. And Mark said, "He reminds me a lot of that kid Jack we had last year." So they could figure out who each other are. But so that ADHD kid has helped us out on a number of occasions because it's much better to get feedback from your peers than your leader. So we've also had some kids that have little social practice, some kids that have been in homeschool, and it was good reason for them to come see us. Shyness. We've had a couple of kids over the years, not a lot, but some that I think have probably had schizophrenia spectrum disorders who've come and who've been able to benefit from the groups as well. Who may not fit. You have to be careful with real behavior and anger management problems. It can really disrupt your group very fast. So if you're a teacher or a speech pathologist thinking of doing this, I would very seriously take, if the child gets suspended frequently, that's not probably a very good person to have in your group right off the bat. If you have somebody, you give them a BASC and they have a lot of elevations on their externalizing behavior scales, might not be a good person to include in your first group. And so we also always encourage our kids with ADHD or bipolar disorder. We've had 1 or 2 over the years we've decided probably had bipolar disorder, need their meds. Also teens with bad habits, because the population is known to mimic and copy a lot, so that can be really problematic. Girls with autism spectrum disorders. I like showing this slide because before I started to work a lot with girls with autism spectrum disorders, I kind of believed the popular literature that said girls can pretend to be normal, they're fine, they have no social problems. So they are thought to be underrepresented in the population, and there's a lot of research and actually genetic research being sort of targeted to try to figure that out better. They were thought to have the same profile as boys with subtler but less severe expression. And I went through this slide and I finally wrote, or not, because I have seen so many girls that look so much like boys with autism. And female socialization produces less aggression, or not. They may be more likely to mother weak peers as opposed to being predatory. Let me tell you, they can be very cliquish, so maybe not. And they may be better at camouflaging their deficits. But remember, they're working with girls, around girls who may be actually kind of more socially adept, so they're going to still stick out. And a paper that we've been working on now actually really suggests that girls with autism, no matter how you slice it, look more like boys with autism than girls with typical development. And hopefully we'll get that out soon. I think that it's good to include girls and boys together because it really creates challenges and promotes learning. Our last groups have been about 50-50. We've had some interesting challenges and issues related to stalking and flirting and so forth. And it's been a wonderful way for us to really teach in the moment and work with families around these really critical adolescent issues that we talked about before. And again, harking back, there's going to be a lot of psychiatric comorbidity in this population just because they're this age. Lots of attention issues, depression, anxiety, and behavioral problems. You know, and as I said before, when we talk about our intervention and we talk about our study, we really have a long way to go, I think, to having a well-researched, well-manualized intervention for this population. We're working on it, but it's, you know, it's a big challenge. What we try to do is we always have an initial intake where we review prior records. We have a psychosocial interview with parents. We set 3 social goals that they themselves are very interested in seeing be achieved in the group. And I like to spend time alone, well, I'd like to spend time with the parent and the child to really see what's going on in their relationship, whether the child is capable of setting goals alone, or whether the parent needs to step in, and how they work together in a collaborative agreement. If I say to you, let's set 3 social goals for Johnny, you know. And then I spend some time alone with the child to try to figure out, you know, to make them feel more comfortable, to show them where we're going to be, you know, prepare them the way you like to do working with children with autism. Determine whether our groups are a good fit, because you'll see if you go out, there's a wide range of kids with autism spectrum disorder. And if you're not careful, you end up in situations that can be challenging for everyone involved. So if you have a child, we've made some mistakes, and if you have a child that's significantly lower in terms of their cognitive functioning than everyone else in the group, it hangs up the group. It makes the group a little less cool. And that child that's a little lower functioning doesn't get as much out of it. So you have to kind of gain your experience in forming a good group. Takes a little bit of a little bit of time. Also determining whether the group model is a good fit. And so we also gather some self-esteem ratings, depression ratings, other psychopathology ratings, and ratings on those goals because we like to be able to track something. A typical group consists of a beginning circle, a game time or an outside time, a lesson time, and a movie and snack and game time, social experiment, and joke time. Social experiments are homework. I think there's a bullet point missing there. And one of the things that we've sort of used here that I think has worked very well, and I would have liked to have shown you a clip of it, but I realized that there was some people in the clip who I hadn't gotten permission to use, so I can't, I'm sorry. But we start every group with a check-in time where we ask 2 to 3 questions of all the members of the group to try to get them to reflect on an issue that's going to be the topic of our group that day. So these are our questions. And we teach members each other's names. They always have to say, "Hi, I'm Johnny, and my answers to the questions are so-and-so." And we give members a chance to reflect on their own identities and other identities. You know, children with autism wouldn't necessarily memorize each other's names or even remember simple facts about other children, like that Johnny likes trains and I like cars, but we always do this activity. They hear the same things over and over about different people, and then we play a guessing game at the end, so they have to remember again about other people. And it also, because we're always asking them these questions, and I'll give you examples of some of the questions in a minute, we provide them with potential topics they've already talked about in a crowd that they might be able to bring up with another person if they're needing that help with abstract reasoning, coming up with a way to sort information. And the questions themselves are kind of nested with respect to how complex they are. So they start real simple and concrete. What's your favorite pizza? What's your favorite ice cream? And they get much more abstract to help the kids develop their abstract reasoning abilities. And like I said, the topic of the questions is always tied to the material of the lessons. So beginning questions are things like, what do you like? What kinds of ice cream, foods, pizza, roller coasters, video games, books do you like? And so we ask each kid to tell us 2 or 3 of those. Later on, we talk about what are you like? And to make it easier, because that's a hard question, we have a verbal prompt of, are you adventurous, creative, cool, quiet, shy, smart. That's always a big favorite, smart. And what's your personality like? And again, we give them options because it's more complex. In the middle of the group, we start asking them questions. Tell us about a friendship you've had. What are 2 important characteristics in a friend? What do you like in new situations? What do you like as a friend? Is there a problem? How did you deal with it? Have you ever been bullied? And right now, the clip I wanted to show you, we've just finished our bullying week, which was a very productive week for our group. A lot of people are getting bullied, so they had a lot of chance to talk about it, to share suggestions, to come up with lists of activities. The parent group had a lot of time to talk about bullying in general. And we've also talked a little bit about recently about cliques and groups and what group do you belong to. But the clip I was going to show you was about a problem. We were talking about problems, and one of the girls in our group said that she had a problem. The problem was that her emotions were too strong, and she didn't tell us exactly what had recently happened, but later we found out that she'd seen a movie in class. I forget the movie, but it was a movie that had something upsetting that happened in the middle of it, and she got very, very overwhelmed and upset, and I basically acted what her peers considered to be inappropriately. So in our group, because she's been here a while, she trusted enough people to say that she had trouble with her problems, they got too big, and she couldn't manage her emotions around them. She got a lot of support from the other kids in the group, who were able to say, I've had a similar problem, here's what you should have done. And I think she probably had never thought about herself as a person who has problems, regulating her emotions. But that's a good piece of information for her to have to carry forward. By the time we get to the end of the group, we use the groups in a psychotherapy way to sort of terminate the group, to have the kids know that the groups are coming to an end and to pay attention to that. What do you like most? What are you going to miss? What are your summer plans? What are you going to do in 5 years? So again, we're moving through that progression where they're hoping they're able to think more abstractly, share that with other people. We have a game time in our group, not too different from most other game times. What we do is really try hard to have the kids play with each other, not play with us. And we always try to have them mix it up, play with different peers. It can be tricky. We've kind of banned art supplies. They get to be too much parallel play. We found that girls who might want to do art supplies can often be engaged around a magazine, and they tend to talk a lot about the magazines if they're of that ilk. I see some people out there smiling who've observed this. We try to assist with conversations, but then fade ourselves out. We try to always reinforce positive behavior. We're really able to work with people who've had problems with cheating and with having trouble if they lose. One individual we've been able to work with, the leaders would kind of interject themselves, and initially this person wouldn't even play a game because we learned at home her family plays a lot of board games, and she would get extremely upset at board games. So we started trying to yank her chain a little bit, make her lose, play Jenga with her, pull out the stick, and eventually she began doing that herself, and she's doing a lot better with that. We worked through a general progression of lessons, understanding your own feelings, understanding the perspectives of others, first impressions, meaning of friendship, conversation skills is always a big part of what we do, and then we work into problem solving and team building. We're now at about we have like 5 more weeks to go, and we're starting to get ready to do a group project. So this is one of the members of our group, and she's going to talk to you a little bit about what the group's been like.
Do you learn things here that you can use at school?
Sometimes.
Like what kind of stuff can you learn at social skills and then take out into
Well, I can practice making conversations and things like that.
Is you good at making conversations?
It makes me better at it.
Do you enjoy practicing conversations?
Not particularly, but it's something I need to do.
Something like eating your vegetables, huh?
Yeah. Not quite eating spinach, more eating green beans.
More eating green beans.
So who says that kids with autism don't have senses of humor? They have good senses of humor often. Social experiment, here we give them something to take with them for the week. We have phone calls, which we've found to be very useful for some kids over the years. We assign them phone buddies frequently. And we've had members, one person who was with us for many years still called her buddies from the first year. They became very good friends, and that was a really nice thing for her. We do a lot of easy, fun kind of assignments. Sometimes they're worksheets that we can talk about, but sometimes they're things like watching TV and picking out emotions, telling us about your friends and yourself. We have our famous Gilligan's Island Meet Survivor thing where we try to see, can people understand each other as social beings, and we tell them that they're all members of their group, have been stranded on a desert island. What role would you give to everybody in the group? And I'm looking out there and I'm seeing one mother of a very good snake venom collector. It was a high status job on Gilligan's Island, I must say. And it's actually very interesting because lower status members generally end up getting things like cooking and cleaning. Joke time. This is a part of groups we've incorporated on and off over the years. Some groups really love them, some groups don't. It's a good way to try to help people who don't understand irony and sarcasm, which is definitely a problem in this population, to understand better what conventional humor is, as well as teach people how to use some of this figurative language and understand some jokes they might be able to tell other people. We've had people, declare, one person, it was great progress when after. And they use joke books because when they start a lot of times on their own, they do what your 5-year-old did, which was say something that's just not a joke and just not funny. And but then over time, if they read enough jokes, they start getting more of an opinion. And of course, this isn't everybody. This is just some people don't get jokes. And they read the book and what was I going to tell you? Oh, one girl just finally read the book and declared, I've realized I'm just not funny. And that was a very, very big moment that I think a lot of us have had when we realize that about ourselves. And it's a safe place for feedback on your ability to tell jokes and to learn, why you don't understand a joke. This gentleman, this young man, is now in community college. He was one of our first social skills group members back about 10 years ago, and he was kind enough to come in with his mother and talk a little bit. And I always fondly remembered him because he was the joke guy. He loved to tell jokes. And here he is talking a little bit about his life and what the groups meant to him.
What do you believe was helpful about the groups? And was it a good experience for you?
You know what? It was a good experience for me. And it really helped me to socialize a lot more. Yeah.
So was that during the group with the other people? Or did it carry on when you went into school? Did it help you
It carried on.
later on?
It did really. It carried on.
Good.
Yeah. Because back then I didn't really socialize that good when I before the group.
Mm-hmm.
And after that I started slowly to socialize a lot more.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
So you made some friends in school or your neighborhood or your relatives?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Anything in particular about the groups that made it easier for you to socialize?
Well, yes.
Is there anything you remember about the groups that you remember was
Well,
fun? And
Well, we talked a lot about stuff. Yeah. Let's see, jokes. I can remember the jokes.
And that's funny because that's exactly what I remember about you, that
Yeah.
you were the joke guy. You were
Yeah.
very good at telling jokes.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I still remember those jokes.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
I cheated on some because I looked down a book. A joke book.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
That's great.
Oh, I know some adult jokes. Okay.
We'll stop there. Okay, after the group, if you're going to work in this kind of modality, you want to be sure that you have post-group meetings and actually get everybody on the team together. So get your parent group together and your sibling group together and the children groups together and debrief. Because you can learn a lot about what's going on in a family and what might be impacting a child. And you want to make plans, and you want to complete a collaborative progress note. It makes it easier for you as a clinician. And working with this population, you just have to keep in mind that you have to be cool, you have to have a thick skin, because, children have to reject the customary social order, and they're not rejecting you necessarily. In order to become an adult, they need to go through that kind of storm and drang. So I like one of the girls who you saw, I think I asked her a question about herself, and she just looked at me and said, "This is so awkward." And I was reminded of many teenagers, including my own children, who say that to me too. So skip over that. But let's talk about some common issues in the population that we've had a little experience dealing with that might be relevant for you. One is, I mentioned romance, and as we talked about before, figuring out your sexual identity is a developmental task that all people are supposed to do. It's part of development. As we talked about in the neuroscience portion of the talk, it is a very potent motivator when your hormones are raging. And so in this population, there's a problem with stalking. People following and being very insistent on, following people even though they're giving signals that most would think would mean lay off. We've actually been able to observe this in our group. We had an instance a year or so ago of a boy who during the phone call portion of the group started calling one girl and started calling her a lot, and then started, really trying to hang around with her on the playground and get her to do things that she didn't want to do. So that was the first time actually it's happened to us in 10 years, and very lovely families, both children. But you see the intersection of strong impulses, lack of perspective taking, and awareness of the social cues and the environment and what's appropriate, and you can see how it could be really a prescription for disaster. But we were very lucky because it happened in our group. So we were able to work with both the child who was having the stalking problem, with their therapist, with their parents, and work with the person who was sort of the quote-unquote victim of the stalking, to kind of become more aware of what's all right and what's not all right. It's not an issue for everybody, but loneliness and the need to be intimate are really important human needs, and so it can become a problem. Really teaching that friendship is best has what's worked the most for us. I'm happy to say that both the individuals that were involved in that little incident are back in our group this year, and they seem to have kind of an appropriate friendship. We haven't seen anything out of the ordinary. And that's why I actually really think it's a very good idea to include boys and girls in social skills groups in this age range. And while that 4-to-1 ratio you saw, we actually are at close to 50-50 now. So I think that's really good. Difficult issues, the transition to employment. And of course, this is the topic of a whole nother talk. This has become an area that's been extremely become so important and is really being publicized a lot in the media as being a real area of unmet need. The commission that Terry mentioned at the beginning, the Interagency Autism Coordinating Committee, puts in place a strategic plan every year. And as part of that, I got to serve on question 5, which dealt with transition and employment. And we were able to have a lot of our suggestions incorporated into the strategic plan. And those are the things that get incorporated in the strategic plan are generally what the various funding agencies write RFAs about. So this is a big area from a political standpoint. Because obviously being able to be successful in a job is of course about your competence and how smart you are and how well you can read the job description and do all the tasks, but you got to work with colleagues in virtually every job. And I think that's another point to make to the child who doesn't want to come to social skills group is that you really need to stress to them if they want to be that excellent. We had one girl who, I don't want to come, I don't need to come, I don't need any friends. But she wanted to be a travel writer. And we said, well, if you're going to be a travel writer, you're going to need to get along with your boss and all the other travel writers. And that got her motivated, at least for the moment, to come in. So, public speaking, dealing with bosses, lasting interpersonal relationships, managing your own mental health and getting help when you need it are obviously critical. So this gentleman I was telling you about has been fortunate to find a job, and so let's listen to what he has to say about it.
Now, I didn't ask you, what are you doing now?
Oh, I have a job.
You have a job,
Yeah.
wonderful. What are you doing?
I work at a pizza restaurant. It's called Woodbridge Pizzeria in Lodi.
And what do you do at Woodbridge Pizzeria?
I help out, I prep, I clean.
Uh-huh.
Sometimes I make pizza.
Uh-huh.
Yeah,
And now, when did you graduate from high school?
last year.
Last year?
Yeah,
And so have you had this job since then?
yeah.
Uh-huh. Are you working?
Wait.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Well, this is my recent job.
Okay, when did
Yeah.
you get this job?
Like, since February. Yeah.
Great. How is it going so far?
It's been going good.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Now, did you have a job before that?
Yes, I had two.
Really?
Like, I had worked at Walmart
Uh-huh.
in Stockton. I was a person called a go back, which I transport items to the rightful aisle.
Good.
Yeah.
So you had that one job. Did you have another job too?
Yes, I worked backstage in the theater.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, helping with changing lights and stuff.
Mm-hmm. So is that as part of high school, or is that after you graduated?
High school.
Good. So you had some jobs in high school.
Yeah.
Do you think that that was helpful to you to have some jobs in high school?
Yeah. Somewhat yes.
Well, I disagree with him. I think it's very helpful to have jobs in high school. And actually, we've been fortunate to be able to graduate two I can think of offhand, folks from our social skills program who've actually gone and helped with social skills program. One of our graduates had a summer job last year, two of them did, helping either child life volunteers. One individual wanted to be a teacher, another just wanted to learn more. And going on to work in a pizza restaurant is one thing that can happen. We also are having actually now a large group of kids who are going off to college and going to really wonderful colleges, some small liberal arts colleges. And we actually started recently working on campus through an Autism Speaks grant, running a socialization program, and Susan Backelman, I see back there, has been helpful with that. So there's a lot of our kids that are now graduating. We're trying to help them the best we can to develop some team skills that'll help them, whether they're going to end up working in engineering firms or the sky's the limit. There's lots of different kinds of jobs that different kinds of kids can have. Another difficult clinical issue can sometimes be the differential diagnosis of psychotic disorders, because most psychotic disorders develop in late adolescence and early adulthood. There's also a cohort of individuals that have been identified that are being called clinical high risk. So they're starting to develop some of the signs of psychosis, but maybe not full-blown psychotic disorder. And throughout time, there's been the fascination in the literature with these topics because the disorders, in some ways, some of the individuals look the same. And there's a lot of reasons that they look the same, but I would say the thing you should take home that I've taken home now from working with both populations is that most of our kids with autism don't go on to develop schizophrenia at a rate any greater than the population. But if you take a look at, and that's I think about 1%, we've had about 200 kids we've worked with, and I've seen about 1 to 2 of them start to look really, truly psychotic. But we do find in the population, in the schizophrenia population, that a lot of the kids have PDD-like traits. We actually have a manuscript we've been working on where we found that about 20% across both this clinical high-risk cohort as well as a cohort of individuals who'd had their first psychotic break did resemble individuals with PDD. So, if you think about it, their diagnosis of autism has really changed over the years, and so there's probably a lot of people running around out there that might have something called schizotypal personality disorder diagnoses in adulthood that maybe now would have been diagnosed as autistic as children. So it's a really interesting research question. And if you have any real questions about this, I can refer you to some colleagues here. Didn't bring their cards, but I see one of them sitting in the back. Well, no, she's not here. Okay. anyway, there's good resources here at UC Davis, and we can help you with that. Another big issue I just felt compelled to put a slide in about is bullying. This year has been a big year for everyone getting bullied in our groups. And another thing I've observed over time is that bully prevention has become a national issue. So this is the logo of one of the government's websites on bullying. It's got a lot of clips. It's got a lot of quizzes you can take. It's got a lot of good information on what you can do. The sad thing is there often isn't a whole lot you can do, and kids with autism spectrum disorders are, in the words of some I've heard, bully magnets. They don't pick up the cues fast enough. They're awkward sometimes. They engage in behaviors that are quick to get them ridiculed. Really bad health habits are a problem for some, and so it's really difficult. We try to encourage them. We give them a chance to talk about it. We give them a chance to know that it's not just them, that most people get bullied at one point or another. We try to help them to see when they're being bullies. But if that doesn't work, sometimes the only thing that seems to work is environmental intervention, which means getting mom and dad involved to try to work to change the culture of the school, to get them off that bus where they're being victimized, to get them out of that classroom where they're repeatedly being victimized. And it may just be a stopgap solution. In very severe cases, I've seen that some kids have had to go to homeschool. But it can really be debilitating to people's self-esteem. And sometimes really nice kids. One mother the other day was showing me a book about why good kids bully, because even very nice good kids do bully sometimes, and if you just happen to stick out a little bit or have a bad rap from a long time ago, you're a victim. So final reflections, I guess I found myself really thinking about whether our groups were worthwhile. And I asked more than just the boy who's at the pizza restaurant. And I think that while we teach a lot of skills, I don't think everybody gets every skill. But I do think that this whole effort of doing social skills groups is really worthwhile because it really helps with the developmental progression. And I'm hearing more and more that the kids are feeling that it was a prelude to them feeling more comfortable in social situations. Another boy that I sat with last week said that it was definitely, this is another one from 10 years ago, it was definitely helpful because it was the first time he'd ever really been in a group of kids. And that really enabled him to go on and join the German club at school and do other things. So that were group settings. So it maybe desensitizes kids to social interaction because they often have positive experiences. They feel better about themselves as social beings and maybe are a little bit more encouraged to try. They often develop close relationships with each other, and that's really important in and of itself. So I think that they're definitely worthwhile. I think we could get better at what we do. Do the kids ever catch up? I think this is an intriguing question. I think that some kids really do, in a very meaningful way, catch up. I think that other kids really make some incredible gains over this period of brain maturation. You can see the picture that I showed you from the NIH of the changes in gray and white matter over time. You can see that one of the things we've really learned from those studies is that brain development goes on into the decade of the 20s. So there's a lot of folk wisdom out there that says that kids with autism, really come into themselves maybe a little bit later. And so I think we've seen a lot of really, really positive outcomes. I think there's a lot of positive growth that's possible. And then there still are issues. Both the boys that you saw on the tapes here are at college, or the ones in the pizza restaurant, pretty isolated. But it's been in some school situations where he remained relatively isolated, and the other boy as well. But he has good, fond memories of the time when he was in a group of boys in our group. And so what needs to be done from a societal point of view? Big question. Like I said, it is on the minds of a lot of people, though. And just to conclude, how can we improve this line of research? We really need to figure out more what constitutes social outcomes so that we can measure it better. We need to integrate what we're doing here anyway in better with the community context. We have been working a little bit this year to develop better behavioral measures. Those goals I talked to you about are not really good, strict, pure, measurable goals often, and so we've been working to possibly have some raters behind our mirror, doing a better job of measuring the goals and actually doing a better job of us setting the goals so that they're more tractable. I would say this is a really hard area. ABA tends to be a very micro endeavor, and the kinds of behaviors we're working on tend to be very macro, and we are working in a group, so doing a lot of functional assessment is really, really hard if you're trying to run a group. So that's something we're working on and thinking through. And biomarkers of treatment effectiveness, trying to figure out who does better and why is another important thing, and what works for whom. So just to bring it full circle, I wanted to bring you the mother of the person who is working at the pizza restaurant now, and she's actually reflecting on her son working with another one of her children.
And so it's been a challenge for us all. And what's been good is his little brother, he has learned how to play, how to teach him how to play and socialize. And so Marcos has been the one directing him. And so it's been a great,
So he's had the opportunity to teach the skills that you taught him.
Yes.
Wonderful.
Yes. So it's been a great experience for him, and he's also learned to have patience with a child. So it's been a very joyful experience with him as well.
And so then just thank you all for coming tonight, and just also let you know who makes this possible, my sources of funding, a very extensive team that works on this all, some of whom have been with the project since the beginning, Beth Goodlin-Jones and Susan Backelman, as well as Mandy's been helping us a lot now with this presentation. And many, many other people. I see some in the audience, Andrea, Kay, who worked with us last year, and if I'm not seeing you, I'm sorry if anyone else is out there. But thank you so much, our volunteer from the Regional Center this year, and as well as our typically developing peers, and all the people here who handle the many, many issues related to billing and so forth, as well as some of my colleagues in research. So thanks.
Does anyone have any questions? Is this working? Okay.
Do you ever see students that are identified as Asperger children actually do the bullying themselves, that are the bullies?
We've definitely seen, we definitely, like I was saying, see a social hierarchy. Being a really good bully requires really good social skills, because you have to be really able to just intuit who's the weak one. So overt, really skilled bullies, I generally think they don't have Asperger's syndrome. I think they have other things going on. But in isolated incidences, sometimes kids in our group, will make somebody else an outcast, so smaller instances of bullying, I think, yes. I'm not going to say it never happens, but it's infrequent. I have seen kids who are large with autism don't get picked on as much because they've learned how to really act out aggressively, and that keeps people away.
I ask only because we have a student at junior high that's been identified by I don't know who as on the spectrum, and he's a really, really horrible bully. And so we have questions.
I obviously don't know your student, but I would say that I think that to be a really good bully requires really good social skills.
Thank you.
Yes.
Marjorie, do you have any plans to follow the 200 students and be able to get some hindsight reflection from them on their experience and what they think the social skills group contributed?
Well, I was sitting with one of the boys who I believe was one of the boys that was in our program some years ago, 10 years ago. That's what it started me. That was like about 2 weeks ago, right before doing this presentation. And I see him now, and it really made me excited about doing something like that. Of course, something like that involves lots of money. So I think eventually we will write a grant. That's we're thinking about a lot of things. We do have a really nice infrastructure in place now. We'll probably write a federal grant to do that, and that could be one component of the grant. We really probably would want to empirically validate our curriculum first, publish it as a manual first. And there are some groups out there that are starting to publish manuals, and so, we'd have to be able to do that, I think, to be competitive to get a federal grant. But yeah, we think about it.
Do you know what causes autism in certain kids? Is it the water they drink, the chemicals they've been exposed to, or is it premature birth or vaccination?
My personal view on that, autism is one of the most highly heritable disorders, psychiatric disorders there is, so there's definitely a genetic component. We don't know a ton about the environment. We're doing really good studies to look at that. I saw one of our researchers here, was here a few minutes ago, who's been really instrumental in those studies. But I think, it does have a large genetic component.
Other questions?
There's one down here, Terry.
What I'm curious about is, you have information on, people who've been diagnosed with autism, if they receive no intervention, like the social skills that helps them adapt and such, over time, do the effect of autism on those people, do you see it diminish, or is it constant, or does it just evolve, or long term?
Well, it's a really complicated question. I mean, in the first case studies, if you've ever heard of a fellow named Ivar Lovaas, who did some of the original ABA work, he believed he could cure people with autism. And there now are reports of people, who looked like they had autism when they were 7 and were really well diagnosed, but don't look that way anymore when they're teenagers. So I think there are people who are thinking that individuals can age out of having autism. But that's not that's not generally what's observed. The disorders are pervasive. That means that they kind of affect a lot of domains of functioning. So there are very, very able adults with autism out there. Probably diagnostic conventions have changed. So a lot of people out there with autism, who were never diagnosed with autism are doing just fine that might have gotten diagnosed today. So it's a really complicated question, I would say. But there are studies that are showing, that good outcomes are possible. And maybe even, blending into, typical lives. I've certainly seen people in the course of working with young adults who've gotten married, who've made very good adaptations career-wise, have figured out the right thing to do. Maybe it came at the expense of a couple of bumps and scratches, but, but they've made it, so.
I have a question. If we are going to socialize them and we realize that they have all these social impediments and developmental issues, are we putting them at risk, putting them in jobs where other people don't have these issues, and other people can, like how they get bullied in school, other people can bully them even in workplaces?
You raise a good point. This kind of issue of bullying doesn't end. It's pretty aggressive in childhood, but more subtle forms of bullying and not so subtle forms of bullying exist on college campuses. We've seen one in our region recently, and in the workplace too. But what's the alternative? If you don't go out at all and you don't try to help them at all, it would not be very fulfilling, I think, to not have any kind of job or chance to have outside relationships. So I think it has to be done carefully. It depends on the very variable. There are some individuals who I think are going to be able to blend fine into certain work environments, maybe working on their own, as an attorney in private practice, or, a forensic pathologist, where the social load isn't that great, might be fine. And so it might, you need a little bit of environmental engineering to find an environment that's suitable. Other individuals who are more severely impaired, may end up working in more sheltered kinds of environments, where their disabilities are well understood. So I think there's a lot of variation in employment that can be structured to the individual to try to prevent that. But of course, there are bullying events.
Okay, we have time for one more question.
So just wondering about did you actually establish a baseline with your impulse control and abstraction tests and then retest the group after your members actually finished the program? And was there an increase in abstraction and impulse control?
I'm sorry, I wasn't clearer. Actually, we have not implemented that as a measure of outcomes in our groups. We actually did our group study back in 2004 and started working with the tasks later. But I was on the phone today with a gentleman at NIH who's planning on using it as an indicator of not actually group effectiveness, but trying to see whether these kinds of variables affect who does well and who doesn't do well over the adolescent period. So, I think it's definitely a possibility to use it in the future. Again, when we get our multi-million-dollar multi-site study, we'll be looking at those things.
All right, thank you all for coming. Thank you, Dr. Solomon, and
Thanks,
please
Terry.
complete your evaluations before you leave tonight.
The UC Davis Mind Institute began in 1998 with a promise to find cures for neurodevelopmental disorders. Every day, our physicians and researchers come closer to fulfilling that promise. Their groundbreaking research on autism, Fragile X syndrome, learning disabilities, and other brain disorders is helping children achieve their fullest potential. Please call or visit our website to find out more about current studies, our research team, and upcoming events.